Have you ever been in a meeting where someone said something and you just nodded along, pretending you understood, but deep down you had no idea what they meant? Or maybe you've hesitated to speak up at work because you weren't sure if your English sounded professional enough. If you've ever felt that way, you're definitely not alone. Thousands of professionals around the world face this exact challenge every single day. But here's the good news. Today, you're going to learn 50 essential English expressions that will transform the way you communicate at work. These aren't just random phrases. These are the real expressions that native speakers use in meetings, emails, presentations, and everyday workplace conversations. By the end of this lesson, you'll feel more confident, more fluent, and ready to handle any business situation in English. So let's dive right in. Let's start with something that happens all the time at work. Someone asks you a question and you need a moment to think. You don't want to say nothing and create an awkward silence, right? So what do you say? Native speakers use phrases like, "Let me think about that for a moment," or "That's a good question, let me consider it." These expressions buy you time without making you look unprepared. For example, imagine your boss asks you, "Do you think we should move forward with this project?" Instead of panicking, you could say, "That's a great question. Let me think about that for a moment." See how natural that sounds? You're showing that you're thoughtful and careful with your decisions. Another powerful expression is, "I see where you're coming from." This is perfect when you want to show that you understand someone's point of view, even if you don't completely agree. Let's say a colleague suggests a strategy you're not sure about. Instead of saying, "I don't agree," which can sound harsh, you could say, "I see where you're coming from, but I think we should also consider other options." This keeps the conversation respectful and collaborative. It shows emotional intelligence, and that's incredibly valuable in any workplace. Now let's talk about making suggestions. In English, there's a polite way to offer ideas without sounding bossy or arrogant. You can say things like, "How about we try this approach?" Or, "What if we did it this way?" Or, "It might be worth considering." Notice how these phrases are gentle. They invite discussion rather than forcing your opinion. For instance, in a brainstorming session, you might say, "What if we focused on social media marketing instead of traditional ads? It might be worth considering given our budget." This makes you sound like a team player, not someone who just wants to be right. Let's move on to agreeing and disagreeing. This is where a lot of learners struggle because they don't want to offend anyone. If you agree with someone, you can say, "I couldn't agree more." Absolutely. Or, "That's exactly what I was thinking." These show enthusiasm and support. On the other hand, if you disagree, you need to be diplomatic. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," try, "I understand your point, but I have a slightly different perspective." Or, "I see it a bit differently." For example, if someone says, "We should cut the budget for training," and you disagree, you could respond, "I understand your concern about costs, but I see it a bit differently. Investing in training could actually save us money in the long run." Here's an expression you'll hear constantly in business. "Let's touch base." This simply means let's connect or let's check in with each other. It's often used when you want to schedule a quick meeting or conversation. You might say, "Let's touch base next week to discuss the progress," or, "Can we touch base tomorrow morning?" It's casual but professional, and it's perfect for keeping communication open without being too formal. Another common one is "keep me in the loop." This means keep me informed or keep me updated. If you're working on a project with a team and you want to know what's happening, you can say, "Please keep me in the loop on any new developments." It shows you're engaged and interested without being overbearing. Now let's talk about deadlines. In the business world, time is everything. If you need to know when something will be done, you can ask, "What's the timeline for this?" Or, "When can we expect this to be completed?" And if you're the one reporting on progress, you might say, "We're on track to finish by Friday," or, "We're running a bit behind schedule, but we'll catch up." Being clear about timelines shows responsibility and professionalism. Here's a phrase that can save you in tricky situations. "Let's take this offline." This means let's discuss this privately or outside of this meeting. It's useful when a conversation is getting too detailed or too heated and you don't want to waste everyone's time. For example, if two people start arguing about a minor detail during a meeting, you could say, "This is important, but let's take this offline so we can stay on track here." It keeps things moving smoothly. Another essential expression is, "I'll get back to you on that." This is perfect when someone asks you a question and you don't have the answer right away. Instead of guessing or saying, "I don't know," you say, "That's a great question. Let me look into it and I'll get back to you." It shows you're responsible and that you care about giving accurate information. Let's talk about asking for help. A lot of people feel embarrassed to ask for help at work, but it's actually a sign of strength, not weakness. You can say, "Could you give me a hand with this?" Or, "I could use your expertise on this," or, "Would you mind helping me out with something?" These phrases are polite and show that you value the other person's skills. For example, "Hey Sarah, I could use your expertise on this presentation. Do you have a few minutes to review it?" Now, what about giving updates? When your boss or team wants to know how things are going, you need clear, concise language. You can say, "We're making good progress. Everything is moving along smoothly. We've hit a small snag, but we're working on it." Or, "We're right on schedule." These phrases give information without unnecessary drama. For instance, in a status meeting you might say, "We're making good progress on the website redesign. We've completed the homepage, and we're right on schedule for the launch." Here's one that's super useful. "Let's circle back to that." This means let's return to this topic later. It's great when you're in a meeting and someone brings up something important, but it's not the right time to discuss it. You might say, "That's a valid point. Let's circle back to that after we finish this section." It acknowledges the person's input while keeping the meeting focused. Another phrase you'll hear a lot is "at the end of the day." This doesn't literally mean at 5 o'clock. It means ultimately, or when everything is considered. For example, "At the end of the day, we need to focus on what's best for our customers." Or, "At the end of the day, profit matters, but so does employee satisfaction." It's a way of summarizing what really matters. Let's talk about presenting ideas. When you want to introduce a new concept, you can say, "I'd like to propose something. Here's what I'm thinking," or "I have a suggestion that might work." And when you want to emphasize an important point, use phrases like "the key thing to remember is," "what's really important here is," or "the bottom line is." For example, "I'd like to propose a new approach to customer service. The key thing to remember is that happy customers lead to repeat business." Now here's a phrase for when things go wrong. "Let's not point fingers." This means let's not blame anyone. It's a mature way to handle mistakes. Instead of blaming, you focus on solutions. You might say, "Yes, something went wrong, but let's not point fingers. Let's figure out how to fix it and prevent it from happening again." This creates a positive, solution-focused culture. Another important one is "let's brainstorm." This means let's come up with ideas together. It's perfect for creative meetings. You might say, "Let's brainstorm some ideas for the new campaign." Or, "Why don't we brainstorm solutions to this problem?" It invites collaboration and creativity. Here's a phrase for setting priorities. "Let's focus on the low-hanging fruit first." This means let's tackle the easy wins before the harder challenges. For example, "We have a lot to do, but let's focus on the low-hanging fruit first. Let's finish the tasks that will take the least time and give us quick results." When you want to check if everyone understands, you can say, "Does that make sense?" Or, "Is everyone on the same page?" Or, "Are we all clear on this?" These are friendly ways to confirm understanding. For instance, after explaining a new process, you might ask, "Does that make sense, or should I go over it again?" Let's talk about giving feedback. This is delicate because you want to be honest but not hurtful. For positive feedback, you can say, "You did a great job on this. I'm really impressed with your work," or "You knocked it out of the park." For constructive feedback, try, "There's room for improvement here. I think we could make this even stronger by," or "One thing to consider is." For example, "You did a great job on the report." One thing to consider for next time is adding more data to support your conclusions. Another useful phrase is, "Let's run it up the flagpole." This means let's present this idea to the decision makers and see what they think. You might say, "I think this is a solid plan. Let's run it up the flagpole and see if management approves. Here's one for managing expectations. Let's be realistic about this. It means let's have reasonable expectations. For example, if someone suggests finishing a huge project in 2 days, you might say, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but let's be realistic about this. We'll need at least a week to do it properly. When you want to emphasize urgency, you can say, this is a top priority. We need to fast-track this, or time is of the essence. For instance, the client needs this by tomorrow, so this is a top priority. Let's drop everything else and focus on this. Now let's talk about networking and building relationships. When you meet someone new in a professional setting, you might say, it's great to finally meet you. I've heard great things about you, or I look forward to working with you. These warm, friendly phrases help build rapport immediately. Here's a phrase for when you're busy. I'm swamped right now. This means I'm extremely busy. You might say, I'd love to help, but I'm swamped right now. Can we schedule this for next week? It's honest without being rude. Another common expression is, let's touch on that briefly. This means let's discuss this quickly without going into too much detail. For example, we don't have much time, so let's just touch on the main points briefly, and we can dive deeper in our next meeting. When you want to delegate, you can say, could you take the lead on this? Or I'd like you to spearhead this project. Or can you handle this? For instance, Maria, you have great experience with social media. Could you take the lead on our Instagram strategy? Here's one for showing appreciation. I really appreciate your help. Thanks for going the extra mile. Or I couldn't have done this without you. Gratitude goes a long way in building strong work relationships. You might say, I really appreciate your help with the presentation. Thanks for going the extra mile to make it look professional. Let's talk about clarifying information. Sometimes you need to make sure you understood correctly. You can say, just to clarify, let me make sure I understand, or so what you're saying is. For example, just to clarify, you want the report by Friday, not Thursday, correct? Another important phrase is, let's keep this confidential. This means let's keep this information private. In business, confidentiality is crucial. You might say, I'm about to share some sensitive information. Let's keep this confidential until we make the official announcement. When something is decided, you might hear it's set in stone. This means it's final and won't change. For example, the launch date is set in stone. We can't push it back. Here's a phrase for being flexible. I'm open to suggestions. I'm flexible on this. Or let's see what works best for everyone. This shows you're collaborative and not rigid. For instance, I have some ideas, but I'm open to suggestions. What does everyone think? Now, what about handling difficult customers or clients? You might need to say, I understand your frustration. Let me see what I can do to help. Or, I apologize for the inconvenience. These phrases show empathy and a willingness to solve problems. For example, I understand your frustration with the delay. Let me see what I can do to expedite your order. Another useful one is, let's think outside the box. This means let's be creative and consider unconventional solutions. You might say, the traditional approach isn't working. Let's think outside the box and try something different. When you're negotiating, you might use phrases like, what if we met in the middle? Or, is there any wiggle room on that? Or, can we find a compromise? These show you're reasonable and willing to work together. For example, your budget is $10,000 and ours is $15,000. What if we met in the middle at $12,500? Here's one for ending meetings. Let's wrap this up. I think we've covered everything. Or, unless there's anything else, we can call it a day. For instance, we've made great progress today. Unless there's anything else urgent, let's wrap this up and reconvene next week. Let's talk about following up. After a meeting or conversation, you might send an email saying, as per our conversation, following up on our discussion, or just circling back on this. For example, following up on our discussion yesterday, here are the action items we agreed on. Another phrase for emphasizing importance is "this is crucial," "this is critical," or "we can't afford to overlook this." For instance, meeting this deadline is crucial. We can't afford to miss it or we'll lose the client. When you're unsure about something, you can say, "I'm not entirely sure about that. I'd need to double check," or "let me verify that information." This is much better than giving wrong information confidently. For example, "I'm not entirely sure about the exact figures. Let me verify that information and send it to you this afternoon." Here's a phrase for managing workload. "I have a lot on my plate right now." This means you're very busy with many tasks. You might say, "I'd love to take on that project, but I have a lot on my plate right now. Can we reassign it or push the deadline?" Another essential expression is "let's stay focused." This is useful when a meeting or discussion goes off track. You might say, "These are interesting points, but let's stay focused on the agenda so we can finish on time." When presenting options, you can say, "We have a few options here. There are several ways we could approach this," or "let's weigh our options." For example, "We have a few options for the marketing strategy. Let's weigh our options and decide which gives us the best return on investment." Here's one for showing confidence. "I'm confident that," "I'm certain this will work," or "I have no doubt that." For instance, "I'm confident that if we implement these changes, we'll see improvement within 3 months." Now let's talk about admitting mistakes because everyone makes them. You can say, "I take full responsibility. That was my mistake," or "I should have handled that differently." Owning your mistakes actually builds respect. For example, "That was my mistake. I should have communicated the changes earlier. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Another important phrase is "let's put our heads together." This means let's collaborate and solve this together. You might say, "This is a tough problem. Let's put our heads together and figure out the best solution." When something is progressing well, you can say, "We're on the right track. Things are coming together nicely," or "we're gaining momentum." For instance, "The project is going well. We're on the right track and I think we'll finish ahead of schedule." Here's a phrase for when you need more information. "Can you elaborate on that?" Or "Could you give me more details?" Or "I'd like to hear more about that." For example, "That's an interesting idea. Can you elaborate on that and tell me how you think it would work?" Finally, let's talk about closing deals or reaching agreements. You might say, "Let's shake on it. Do we have a deal?" Or "I think we're in agreement." For instance, after negotiating terms, you might say, "So we're agreed on the timeline and the budget. Do we have a deal?" Now here's something really important to understand. Learning these expressions isn't just about memorizing words. It's about understanding the culture of English-speaking workplaces. Communication in business English tends to be direct but polite, professional but friendly, efficient but respectful. When you use these phrases, you're not just speaking English. You're showing that you understand how to navigate professional relationships in English-speaking environments. Think about how different your next meeting could be. Instead of staying quiet because you're not sure what to say, you'll have the exact phrases you need. Instead of worrying whether you sound professional, you'll know that you're using the same expressions that native speakers use every single day. That confidence will change everything. People will take you more seriously. You'll contribute more to discussions. You'll build stronger relationships with colleagues and clients. And ultimately, you'll open up more opportunities for career advancement. I want you to imagine yourself 3 months from now. You've been practicing these expressions. You've used them in real conversations at work. How different does your professional life look? Maybe you've impressed your boss in a meeting. Maybe you've successfully negotiated a deal with a client. Maybe you've led a presentation with confidence. Maybe you've even gotten that promotion you've been hopping for. All of that is absolutely possible, and it starts with mastering these essential expressions. Here's my challenge for you. Don't just watch this and forget about it. Pick 5 expressions from this lesson that feel most relevant to your work situation. Write them down. Practice saying them out loud. Then, over the next week, Challenge yourself to use each of those 5 expressions at least once in a real work situation. It might feel a little uncomfortable at first, and that's completely normal. But I promise you, the more you use these phrases, the more natural they'll become. And before you know it, they'll be a permanent part of your English vocabulary. Remember, every successful professional who speaks English fluently today was once exactly where you are right now. They felt uncertain. They made mistakes. They had moments of doubt, but they kept going. They kept practicing. They kept pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. And that's exactly what made them successful. You have everything you need to do the same thing. You're already here, learning, improving, investing in yourself. That's what winners do. So keep going. Keep practicing. Keep believing in yourself. Your English is getting better every single day, and your professional future is brighter than you might even realize right now. I believe in you, and I'm here to support you every step of the way. Thank you so much for being here today. Now go out there and use these expressions. Show the world what you're capable of. I'll see you in the next lesson.